Everyone knows therapy is great for solving problems, but getting therapy has its own problems too, like finding the right therapist, fitting into their schedule, and of course, the cost. Well, BetterHelp can solve those problems. It's totally online and built around your schedule. It's surprisingly affordable too. Connect with a credentialed therapist by phone, video, or online chat, all from the comfort of your home. Visit BetterHelp.com to learn more and save 10% on your first month. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Need new glasses or want a fresh new style? Warby Parker has you covered. Glasses start at just $95, including anti-reflective, scratch-resistant prescription lenses that block 100% of UV rays. Every frame's designed in-house with a huge selection of styles for every face shape. And with Warby Parker's free home try-on program, you can order 5 pairs to try at home for free. Shipping is free both ways, too. Go to warbyparker.com/covered to try 5 pairs of frames at home for free. warbyparker.com/covered.
Super real.
Hey, I'm Julian Morgans, and you're listening to What It Was Like, the show that asks people who have lived through big, dramatic events what it was like. I have an admission to make. I think my favourite thing to watch on YouTube is big ships in big storms. I love weather. When I was a kid, my favourite movie was Twister. And I also think, well, this might come as no surprise, but I like looking at how people behave in extreme situations. I mean, look at this podcast. So, as you can imagine, ships in big storms, as a genre, as a YouTube category, it just kind of ticks all my boxes. But the thing about these videos is that they're somehow never quite enough. I always want bigger waves, bigger lightning. I want disaster porn on an epic scale. And that's how a few weeks ago, I found myself Googling the words cargo ship hurricane. And it was that Google search that brought me to this story. You see, cargo ships don't sail through hurricanes. Well, not usually. It's one of the advantages of the modern era. Thanks to GPS and satellite imagery, commercial ships, they can just navigate around hurricanes or just not go out to sea when there's one in the area. But in this case, in 2015, a very experienced American captain sailed his ship into the eye of a monster hurricane and killed everyone on board. The ship was called the El Faro, which means lighthouse in Spanish, and it was en route from Jacksonville, Florida, under the command of Captain Michael Davidson, and it was bound for San Juan in Puerto Rico. And if you've ever wondered how food and cars and supplies get to small tropical islands, the answer is everything is delivered on ships like the El Faro. The El Faro was a big ship. Okay, it was huge, and it was built in 1975, and it's kind of this ugly, blocky thing. Imagine a boat-shaped platform with a rectangular block in the middle that contained all the cabins, and then there's hundreds of shipping containers stacked all over the bow and all over the stern. And when it went down, it was loaded with almost 13,000 tons of cargo, including food, cars, trailers, and machinery. But what I think is truly interesting is how the captain and the crew managed to convince themselves that it would be okay to sail through a hurricane, or to even just sail near a hurricane. The universe had dealt them this unlikely array of misconceptions, little miscommunications, pieces of faulty equipment, and just a sprinkling of bad luck that had created this situation that was just perfectly stacked against them, and in ways that none of them really properly understood. And I think that if you'd removed any of these one factors, the El Faro's crew would have survived. But it all played out in a perfect sequence. But not just that. I think, for me, the most interesting part to this story is the way that everyone ignores their intuition. I think it's really the subtext throughout this whole case. And I know this because the ship had a black box. Okay, so you know how planes have got black boxes. Every time there's a plane crash, you hear about how they retrieve the black box and they can listen to the recordings of the pilots and the things that they talked about leading up to the disaster. Well, it turns out that ships have exactly the same thing. Ships have black boxes as well. And after the El Faro went down, it took investigators about a year to find the black box. Imagine a little electronic chip about the size of a credit card, and that's what they were looking for. And it was sitting almost 5 kilometers under the ocean. And somehow investigators managed to find it with a submersible, and they brought it back up. And then a team of experts listened back to every conversation that had happened in the control room, or as they're called, the bridge of the ship, for 26 hours before the sinking. And you can't get black box recordings. Believe me, I tried. But what I could get was a transcript of the recording. The recording was turned into a transcript of everything the crew said leading up to their deaths. And this is publicly accessible. And I got to say, it's fascinating. You know, these are conversations with people who will be dead in several hours, but they have no idea. And I mean, you know, that's haunting. It's awful. But what I see time and time again throughout this transcript is people ignoring their gut. And I find it interesting because, well, I guess because it's relatable. You know, I think everyone ignores their own intuition all the time. I know I certainly do. I did it last week. I was in my car. I was driving out to the airport, and Google Maps was telling me, "Hey, go left on the freeway." But there was all these signs that said "airport to the right," and I could feel it in my bones. I knew I should go right. Airport's definitely to the right, but for some stupid reason, it felt easier, it felt more comfortable to just follow Google Maps. Google Maps is like, yeah, trust me, this way, go left. But I went left, and then, of course, I blew up my journey by 20 minutes. And, you know, maybe this is a trivial case in my own life to compare next to the sinking of a ship, but the point is that I ignored my intuition, I knew it was wrong, I did it anyway, and then I missed the exit. And reading the details of the El Faro case, it kind of seems to me that they were playing the life and death version of should I take the exit? They had so many should we take this exit style conversations, but then every time they did the thing that was less difficult and they stuck to plan A. And that's why I wanted to do this story. It's a big disaster story, but the psychological mechanics, they feel familiar. And I think if I'd been on that ship, I'd have probably made all the same mistakes. So, like I said before, there were no survivors. Usually on this show, I talk to someone who was there, but I can't talk to anyone, so it's going to be just you and me. So here it is. Here's the sinking of the El Faro. Let's start with the main character, the captain. His name's Michael Davidson, and I want you to picture a very American, athletic, professional-looking guy. Okay? Full head of hair. He's got a big jaw, and his chin has got this like perfect little dimple in the middle. So this was a man whose life was pretty much unfolding how he wanted. Nothing had really gone wrong until in 2012, something rocked his world. And that is that he was working for one of America's biggest maritime companies. This is a company called Crawley Maritime, and he'd been asked to sail a ship from one port to another in Chesapeake Bay. So, seems pretty simple, right? Except that Davidson declined. He found out that there was a problem with the vessel's steering gear, and instead of risking the crew's safety, he decided to get the ship towed, which, sure, it was safer, but it was a hell of a lot more expensive. And then after that, he found out that he'd lost his job. And it was a pretty significant firing. Like, he had to start all over again as a humble third mate. He got another job at a different company called Tote, that's T-O-T-E, and he started working there, but he was hired as a third mate. So he'd really been knocked down a few rungs on the ladder. Now, Tote was the company that owned the El Faro, and Davidson got command of the San Juan run. So when you look at this story and you look at this guy's biography, it kind of makes sense why, on this particular run down to San Juan, he might have been tempted to not worry about a hurricane and just sacrifice safety for speed. On Tuesday evening, September 29, 2015, the El Faro pulled out from Jacksonville. It was 8:07 p.m. on a warm, calm evening, and on board they had 33 personnel, consisting of 28 Americans and 5 Poles. Davidson knew there was a tropical storm brewing along their route, but at the time, it was several hundred miles to the east. Not just that, but Davidson had cut his teeth sailing around Alaska, where seas are huge. So compared to Alaska, this run through the Caribbean past a tropical storm, it actually seemed kind of easy. So I said before that the transcript goes for 26 hours, and it starts the day after departure. And it's early in the morning, just before dawn. And I want you to imagine that we're up in the bridge, okay? Like I said before, this is the control room. This is HQ. And there's two men poring over charts that are spread over a table. It's the chief mate and Captain Michael Davidson, and they're conferring about the route that they should take. And the ship is gently rolling in the swell. And the chief mentions the swell, and Davidson says it's only going to get worse. And they were checking out satellite images of Tropical Storm Joaquin, which, by the way, Joaquin is the name of the hurricane. And at that time, it was expanding and intensifying really rapidly. And Davidson actually points to it and he says, yeah, see how it's festering? And he's looking at the images like, here's how it was yesterday. And he's looking at it here and he's like, this is how it is now. And he's like, damn, these ones are hard to predict. These are the worst ones. And this is what he says in the transcript. And at this point, they're trying to figure out what course to take. They know that the storm's likely to turn into a hurricane. It wasn't a hurricane yet, but they knew it was pretty much guaranteed. But it was really hard to predict where it was going to go. And at that point, they had two routes. They had two options. They were currently cutting straight across the clear ocean, which was fast, but it was going to be exposed. Well, the other option that they had was something called the Old Bahama Channel, which sounds like a delicious cocktail, I think. But it was like a backup route. And the Old Bahama Channel is safe. Well, it's safer because it basically hugs Cuba. And then it winds its way through all these little islands. And the islands provide a bit of shelter. If you've got huge swell and huge waves, the islands tend to break up the swell. So taking the Old Bahama Channel would have given them a bit of safety. But it also adds an extra 6 hours to the trip. So Davidson, he wants to take the faster route, even though it's got no protection. And they think they can get away with it. They think that if they cut straight across the ocean and they do a little turn at the last minute, they can pass 80 kilometers, which is about 50 miles, from the hurricane's eye. And they think it's going to be tight. They know it's going to be a little hairy. It's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride at the end. But Captain Davidson, he thinks they can do it. Now, I said it was the morning, okay? So the sun's coming up. And we're still in the bridge. The microphones, they're only in the bridge. So throughout this whole thing, throughout the transcript, throughout this episode, all of the conversation we get, all of the story, it just centers around this one room. And this one room, they're up high, it's at the top of this big like building block style thing on the back of the ship. And what they're looking out over is stacks of shipping containers. And then beyond that, they can see over the clear ocean without any land in sight. And it's about 6:40 a.m. and the sun's coming up. And do you know that saying? I think I've heard this saying. It's like an old sailor's saying, and it's red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky at morning, sailors take warning. Well, apparently the sunrise on that last morning, it was deep red because Davidson mentions it, and it's in this transcript. He looks out the window and he goes, "Oh, look at that red sky over there. Damn, that's bright." And then he and the chief mate, they finish their shift and they get replaced by two new guys for the morning shift. By this point, it's sort of like 8, 9 a.m. and these guys are nervous, okay? Page after page. Mostly what they talk about is the storm. And every now and then they'll stop talking about the storm and they'll talk about something else for a bit. It's usually some boring sort of technical stuff about sailing ships. But then the conversation always drifts back to the storm. There's actually one conversation that really stood out to me. And these guys, they start talking about Spanish sailors and how Spanish sailors used to run into hurricanes and the way that they used to sail through hurricanes and like it was no big deal. And there's this one guy and his words are captured on the transcript and he says, yeah, Spanish sailors, they survived, the outer eye, it just passed right over them. And he's saying this as though the Spanish sailors who went through these hurricanes, like they didn't even care, like it was easy. And reading this, I kind of get the feeling that the El Faro crew were trying to bolster their confidence. They knew at this point they were probably sailing in a bad direction, but they wanted some sort of historical reason why that might be okay. And I get the feeling that by talking about these Spanish sailors that had allegedly survived hurricanes in the 1700s, maybe it made them feel less alone. And, by the way, this doesn't even seem to be true. I read this in the transcript and then, of course, I did some Googling. And what I found is that Spanish sailors used to get wiped out by hurricanes all the time. There's actually a real famous case, the 1715 Treasure Fleet, which is it's a great name. And this was a Spanish treasure fleet that was returning from the New World back to Spain, and their galleons were full of silver and gold, and they departed from Florida, and then almost immediately they ran into a hurricane, and all 11 ships were lost in these huge waves. And now here we are, like hundreds of years later, in roughly the same area on a doomed ship. And these sailors are sort of looking at the Spanish mariners of the past to try to bolster their confidence. I don't know. It's like these two points in time just sort of like quietly rhyming with each other. It somehow felt kind of eerie to me. The other part in this conversation that stood out to me was two crew members. They start talking about the perfect storm. I'm not sure if you've seen that. It was a movie released in 2000 starring Mark Wahlberg and George Clooney. Okay, and it's about these guys, these swordfish fishermen who sail into the perfect storm. Anyway, it's a disaster. As you can imagine, it's a total disaster. And the guys on the El Faro, they talk about this film. One of them's like, it's all right, man. It's not going to be like that movie that we saw, The Perfect Storm. And the other guy, what he says is, oh yeah, I saw that movie, but I don't like watching that. I saw it, but, I did not like that movie. And then they chuckle. These two guys chuckle. And this is a bit, because these guys don't know it, but in 12 hours, they're going to find themselves in exactly the same situation as depicted on this movie that the guy couldn't even watch because it's so terrifying. So the clock keeps ticking down, and it's noon. And these two guys that have been talking about movies and Spanish sailors, they get relieved by two new people. One of them's important, so I'm going to spend a moment introducing her. And this is the second mate, Danielle Randolph. And in my humble opinion, Danielle Randolph is a bit of a minor hero in this story for two reasons. First of all, she's only one of two women on board. And everyone seems to like her. Every time she appears in the transcript, there's obviously a bit of like, oh, hey, Danielle's here. That's cool. How you doing? Oh, it's nice to see you. Hey, you look nice today. There's a bit of like a minor sort of flirtatious kind of vibe there, I think. But she seems to be really liked, really respected by everyone on board. But the other reason I think that she's a likable character in this is that she's one of the few people to really push back on the captain. So like the captain, Danielle came from Maine. And she was originally a graduate of the Maine Maritime Academy. And she's small, all right? She's just over 5 foot tall, so she's like a little pocket rocket. And she was 34 years old at the time. And in photos, she's got this light brown hair, sensible face. She looks like she always did her homework on time. She didn't really mess around. A previous captain had actually been fired for getting a bit sleazy around her. So that's a sense of who Danielle Randolph is. And she comes into the room, all right? She appears first on the transcript, coming into the bridge, and she's complaining about Davidson. And she's obviously seen him downstairs, and she's imitating how nonchalant he is about this crazy route that they're taking. And she's imitating him, going, oh, he says it's nothing. Like, oh, it's just a little storm. And it's clear that she's kind of angry with him. And then suddenly Davidson shows up. He's in the bridge, but his head isn't on the storm that they're going into. His head is like, bizarrely, he's worried about the schedule because already they're getting some swell. So they're trying to power this boat through swell that's coming from the opposite direction. And he's getting annoyed because it's slowing them down. And Danielle Randolph, she responds kind of defiantly. And she tells him, hey, the priority's arriving safely. Don't even worry about the schedule. And it seems to me in this moment here that there's a bit of a rift, like a very implicit rift opening up between Captain Davidson and the rest of the crew. He was still worried about making the schedule, and everyone else throughout the transcript up to this point has been thinking about survival. So what's going on here? Well, if we dig into his biography a little bit more, we see that there's something else that's happening in the background. So Davidson had a career of big achievements. But I said earlier he'd been knocked down to third mate when he started working at Tote. And since then, he's been climbing the hierarchy back to captain, okay? He's now in charge of the El Faro, except the El Faro kind of sucks. At that point, it's 40 years old. It's about to be retired. It's got a bit of rust. The technology on it, it's really antiquated. And Davidson, he's a guy who wants big things from his life. He's ambitious. And so what happens is that he gets wind that Tote is actually going to replace the El Faro with a brand new ship. Actually, 2 ships. Tote's going to replace the El Faro and her sister ship with 2 cutting-edge, state-of-the-art, gas-powered ships. And Captain Davidson, he applies to be captain of one of these new ships, but he got knocked back. So recently, he's done his performance review, and he's got top marks, and he was still crossing his fingers. He really wanted a shot at getting hired as a captain on the second brand new ship. So he'd been told, hey, look, just keep sticking to schedules. Don't mess with the schedules. Keep your head down. Work hard. You might get this promotion. And that's why, at this point, he was willing to take some dumb risks, and the rest of the crew were not. So we're working our way through the transcript now, and it's afternoon. It's the afternoon before the sinking. And in about 14 hours, the ship goes down. But right now, things are okay. It's beginning to cloud over, and the roll is getting bigger, but they're doing okay. And just before 5 p.m., the latest weather report comes through, and Randolph, she takes the printout and she takes it to the table and plots it out. You know, there's a bit of maths in this, and you crunch the numbers and you work out, if we go at this speed for this long, and here's where we'll end up. So she figures out where the hurricane's going to be, where they're going to be, and then she laughs. She laughs and she goes, oh, you got to be kidding me. And she's just realized that they're not going to narrowly miss the hurricane. Instead, the hurricane's getting bigger, much faster than they predicted, and now it's going to directly intersect them. And she realizes this, and she says something that none of them have yet said. She says, we're going to go right through the fucking eye. Those are her words on the transcript. And the other guy in the room, he comes over and he agrees that they need another plan. He says, there's got to be another way. But for reasons unknown, neither of them get on the phone to the captain. Neither of them call an emergency meeting. Neither of them get the union rep on the phone. They just don't do the things you'd want them to do. Instead, they just kind of joke about it. And why? Why? This seems really serious. They know at this point they're about to sail through the middle of a hurricane, and they joke about it. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. I mean, first of all, they didn't know how intense the storm's going to be, all right? They thought it was going to have winds at about 150 kilometers an hour, which, that's a hell of a ride, but that's survivable. But what they're actually in for, they didn't know this, but what they're actually in for were winds at 220 kilometers an hour with gusts much faster. And that's a big difference. But the other thing is that they're experienced mariners. They've ridden out big storms before, and it's just part of the job. And I think, it's all well and good for me with my 2020 hindsight and my armchair podcast to go, why don't they abort? But from their perspective, it's entirely reasonable that they're going to get through the storm. And so they do nothing. And the hours just continue to drift past. And now it's evening, and the sun goes down, and Randolph goes downstairs, and she gets dinner. And then she comes back up to the bridge, and there's some talk about the jerk chicken they were serving. And then there's lots more nervous talk. Everyone's nervous. It's just the subtext in every line of this transcript. It's just nerves. More hours go by. And then finally they get some really accurate info. And it comes in at 10:54 p.m. and the printer spits it out. It's the latest update from the National Hurricane Center. And the storm, they can see that the storm's really blowing up. At this point, Joaquin has graduated from a tropical storm, and it's now a Category 3 hurricane, packing winds that are well over 200 k's an hour. And the effect this has on the crew is very slight, but you can see it. You can see it in the transcript. And I think what's interesting is that this is the point where we see 2 people try to convince the captain to change course. As far as I can see, it only happens twice. 2 people try individually, and both times they're rebuffed. So the first person to try is a guy named Jeremy Ream. He's 46, and it's almost 11:30. And he's looking at the charts, and he decides, you know what, screw this. He's going to call the captain. And he knows that the captain's asleep. The captain's asleep in his quarters. So this is kind of like a big move. Ships have got very rigid hierarchies. Rousing your captain from his sleep, that's a big statement. And the mics only catch half of Ream's end of the chat, but you can kind of guess what Davidson's saying. So Ream gets on the house phone, calls him up, and it starts with, Hey, Captain. Yeah, I'm sorry to wake you. No, nothing. No, just the latest weather came through, and I thought you might want to have a look at it. But then rather than saying, hey, look, this is stupid, this is suicidal, he says, I thought you might want to take a look at it. And then you can't hear this on the mics and you can't read it in the transcript, but Davidson is on the other end of the phone and he seems to ask for details. And then Reem rattles off some numbers and then Davidson replies for almost a minute, during which Reem just nods along and says, okay, yep. Yeah, okay. And then he gets off the phone having clearly been told that they're not changing course and there's nothing to worry about. And what he says aloud is, he thinks we'll be south of it by then, so he says the winds won't be an issue. And then everyone laughs about how the winds will totally be an issue. And one guy says he's already got his immersion suit laid out on his bed, ready to go. And again, everyone just kind of chuckles nervously. And that was attempt number 1. And then there's attempt number 2. And this is Danielle Randolph. At this point, it's 1:30 in the morning. And she hears a radio report that reiterates that Joaquin is now a Category 3. And she decides to call the captain, just like Reem. And she also doesn't have much luck. And she gets on the phone. And this time, she suggests an alternate route. She says that they could do an escape route to the south that would take them through the islands. But again, Davidson rejects the suggestion. And she gets off the phone frustrated. And she kind of criticizes Davidson. Not overtly, but she laughs. And when someone says, what did he say? She goes, he said to run it, meaning run the course as planned. And then she goes, all right, hold on to your ass. And she laughs. But it's, you can imagine that it'd be nervous laughter. And that's it. Twice, people try to tell the captain, change the plan. And twice he pushes back. And my first thought is, it's always easier to go with the crowd, to do the short-term, easy thing, regardless of the long-term consequences. I think, just generally speaking, it's easier to keep your head down and hope for the best than to do something, anything that's different. And I don't know at what point they were locked into this ride, but surely at this point, and there's still about 6 hours on the clock, they could have abandoned the current plan. But they carried on. They just kept powering on towards the storm. Hey, we're going to stop here for a quick ad break, but we'll be right back with more What It Was Like.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
This is Paige, the co-host of Giggly Squad, and I want to tell you about a company that I've been loving, Olive & June. Olive & June gives you everything that you need for a salon-quality manicure in one box. And if you break it down, it really comes out to $2 a manicure, which is absolutely insane. It's also so easy to get salon-worthy nails at home with Olive & June. The difference between how your nails used to look when you did them yourself and now with the Mani system is a complete game changer. The best thing about Olive & June, too, is it's a quick dry. Dries in about 1 minute, lasts for 5 days, and full coverage in up to 1 to 2 coats. Visit oliveandjune.com/perfectmani20 for 20% off your first system. That's oliveandjune.com/perfectmani20 for 20% off your first system.
If you thought the only way to get a more defined jawline with natural-looking results was through surgery, think again. Juvederm Volux XC is a non-surgical injectable gel filler that improves moderate to severe loss of jawline definition and can help you achieve natural-looking results with little downtime. Even better, this improved definition lasts up to 1 year with optimal treatment. No maintenance required. Improve jawline definition for a smooth, sculpted look with Juvederm Volux XC. For important safety information and to find a licensed specialist, visit Juvederm.com. That's JUVEDERM.com. Not for people with severe allergic reactions, allergies to lidocaine, or the proteins used in Juvederm. Common side effects include injection site redness, swelling, pain, tenderness, firmness, lumps, bumps, bruising, discoloration, or itching. There's a risk of unintentional injection into a blood vessel, which can cause vision abnormalities, blindness, stroke, temporary scabs, or scarring. Talk to a licensed specialist to find out if it's right for you.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds, and I'm here with Keith, co-star of my upcoming film, If, only in theaters May 17th. Do you want to tell people the big news? All right, I'll do it. Sign up now and you'll get unlimited for $15 a month and 6 months of Paramount Plus Essential Plan on us.
mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 equivalent to $15 per month. Unlimited over 40 gigabytes per month. Face lower speeds. Videos at 480p. Active Mint customers by 531.24 get 6 months of Paramount Plus Essential Plan. Auto renews after 6 months. Offer ends May 31st, 2024. Separate Paramount Plus registration required. Terms and conditions apply if rated PG.
By 2 a.m., they've got lightning and heavy rain, and there's lots of references to the size of the waves. At one point, Randolph goes, "Oh shit, oh my god," which was presumably a big wave that had smashed over the bow. And again, I want to reiterate the plan. They think now that they're running alongside the hurricane, and they think that any moment the wind's going to change direction because they're getting past it. But actually what's happening is that they're just plowing further and further towards the eye. They're just going straight in. And so the wind, it just keeps getting harder, the waves get bigger, and they can't figure out why. It seems important here to address why they were having such a hard time navigating. And there's an author who's done a really good job of explaining it. His name's William Longavashi, and he's a bit of a favorite author of mine. And he's got this incredible Vanity Fair article on this case that makes a point that I didn't know about. And it's a little rule of thumb for weather prediction based on how the world's trade winds operate. And he says, it doesn't matter how you're traveling. Okay, you could be in a boat, you could be in a plane, you could be walking, riding, whatever. The rule is that if you are in the northern hemisphere and if you feel the wind to your left, the chances are that you're heading towards lower atmospheric pressure. And that usually spells bad weather ahead. And the whole time, on this ship, these sailors, they keep asking, why is the wind coming from the left? Shouldn't it be coming from the right? Shouldn't we be getting past this thing? And no one seems to realize that the wind is on their left because they're sailing into lower atmospheric pressure. They keep referring to the barometer. They're like, is the barometer coming up? And every time they look at the barometer, it's always dropping. And just no one can seem to put two and two together. It's like this mental inertia. And it's really frustrating to watch it play out. But there's another thing about their bearings, okay? Another reason why they're struggling to navigate. And it's because Davidson's preferred method for weather forecasting, it's a bit dodgy. He uses this program that's a little bit like Weather for Dummies. It's this like subscription service called the Bon Voyage system, or the BVS for short. And it provides animated forecasts of weather patterns for mariners. And he likes it. You know, Davidson likes it because you can just look at this thing and it's colorful and you don't have to crunch any numbers. You don't have to chart any courses. It's automated. It feels comfortable. But what Davidson didn't know was that each map from BVS was based on weather data that was a minimum of 6 hours old. So BVS actually has a tropical version of their service, but that's like the premium version, and they hadn't subscribed. So they were like using the basic package, and Davidson didn't realize. So he's always looking at information that's 6 hours old. And when you're trying to predict the movements of a fast-growing hurricane, weather data that's 6 hours old is basically obsolete. But he doesn't know that, which is how he managed to put the ship in just the wrong spot. And this is a very crucial piece of bad luck. But then, just then, something else happens. So it's now 4:40 a.m., and they've got 3 hours left on the clock. And the hurricane is raging outside, and everyone suddenly notices that the ship has a bit of a tilt to it. It's got a bit of a list. You know, it's kind of riding on one side, and they don't know why, but they assume that the wind is pushing them over. And no one's concerned at first because they're like, yeah, well, we're getting buffeted by a hurricane, so of course, you know, we're getting pushed over slightly. But then there's a call. There's a call from the engineers downstairs, and there's a problem because as the ship is banking to one side, the oil that lubricates the engine is losing pressure. And as you'd know, if you've ever run out of oil in your car, engines seize up if they don't get enough oil. So it's really important they level the ship out so the oil can flow freely into the engine. So the captain, he orders the boat to turn into the wind. So what he's trying to do, he's trying to get the wind coming directly at them. So instead of like buffeting the huge expanse of surface area along the side of the ship, he just wants it to come at them head on. And he's thinking that'll allow the ship to level out and it'll allow the oil to go into the engine and, you know, it'll solve the problem. So that's what they do. They turn the ship around. It's now facing into the wind, but nothing happens. If anything, the list starts to get a little worse, which indicates it's not the wind. Something else is happening. maybe they're taking on water. And now there's another call, and the engineers below have found flooding. It's down in the ship, below second deck. It's this huge area called Threehold, and it's right in front of the engine room. And it's jam-packed with cars. And the deck above it, yeah, it's designed to be all wet. The deck above, it's designed with these holes in the hull that let the water slosh in and out. But there's a snag. So there's these heavy watertight hatches, and they're called scuttles, and they connect the second deck to the cargo hold below. I know this is a little complicated, so bear with me. So these scuttles, the crews sealed them up the day before, right? They know they're going into a hurricane, so they secure all the scuttles. But maybe they missed one, or maybe a wave has forced one of them open, because now one of the scuttles is letting in water. And the three-hold with all these cars, it's just a wash. Suddenly there's all these cars floating around in this oily seawater inside this enormous cavernous deck inside the boat. You can't even go in there and close the scuttle because there's all these big heavy cars just washing around inside the ship with the hurricane going on. So to close the scuttle, they need to first lower the water, and the captain has an idea. And this is kind of a crazy idea, by the way. He wants to turn the boat around, and he wants to use the hurricane to prop the ship up. As in, imagine the boat, it's leaning on one side. The captain now wants to turn the boat around so that the side that's full of water is getting propped up by the wind. He's basically suggesting they use the hurricane as a jack. They're using it as a tool to lift the flooded side up in the water. And so they try it. They turn the ship around in the wind, in this mountainous sea, and it works. The hurricane props them up, and they manage to get the scuttle closed, and they start pumping out the water from Threehold. And there's this sense amongst the crew that, oh my God, we might be all right. I thought we were screwed, but this might work. We're pumping out the water, but it doesn't work. It doesn't improve the list. They've closed the scuttle, but the list continues to worsen, and they don't know why. Now, I should say at this point, they're about to enter the wall of the hurricane. This is where the storm is at its absolute worst. And there's all this talk about how it should be easing up. At any minute, it's at our back. It's going to be in the rear vision mirror. It's going to be improving, but it's not. And it won't. They just don't know where they were in relation to the storm, and it's all getting a bit hopeless. First of all, at this point, they're slowly flooding, and they can't seem to find the source of the water. And secondly, the list is causing the engines to fail. And if the engine fails, they're pretty much done. So they're trying to solve each problem one at a time. But the transcript, it's sounding tense. It feels tense. Whereas before there was this nervous excitement, it's clear that now they're just scared. At this point, Captain Davidson does a great job of sounding brave. I think he's depicted in a lot of the media as a bad guy. This reckless captain who sunk the ship. But in this moment, he's really kind to the crew. He checks in with them. He's telling them reassuring things that aren't necessarily true, but they sound very reassuring. At one stage, he's downstairs and he comes up into the bridge. And what he says is, wow, it sounds so much worse up here. When you get downstairs, it's a lullaby. At another stage, he says, it's like this every day in Alaska. And the other crew want to hear this stuff. It's clear that they're looking to the captain for reassurance. And he gives it. I actually think Michael Davidson comes across as a pretty caring and he's a really brave guy. He must have been shitting himself. Like, he's got all of this responsibility, plus fear of his own mortality. And yet he's just, he seems level-headed. He's always just checking in with the crew. He seems to be putting the others before him. At one stage, he looks over at a guy named Frank Ham, who's listed as an able seaman. And it's obvious that Frank's getting upset. And Davidson asks him, Frank, how you going? You all right? You want a cup of coffee? And then he makes Frank a cup of coffee and offers him his chair. And it's these little moments, that's not a huge thing to do, but it's just a little moment of generosity. It's these moments of humanity. If the thesis of this episode is what it was like sailing a ship into the eye of a hurricane, then the answer is nightmarish. But reading the transcript, at this point, it's kind of heartwarming. But then, sadly, the whole thing just continued to get worse. It's 6:13 a.m., and suddenly the vibration of the ship's engine cuts out, and then there's just the wind and rain, and everyone realizes they've just lost the engine. And without the engine, they have no way of angling themselves against the wind or the waves. So it must have just been the worst moment. A second later, the phone rings. It's the chief engineer. As the captain had already figured, the engine was dead. And this is undoubtedly what prompted Davidson to make a Mayday distress call. At this point, in the early hours of the morning, no one in the outside world knew that the El Faro had sailed straight into the hurricane. The senior management at Tote had probably gone to bed assuming that Davidson would just navigate around it. So Davidson's first concern was waking up his superiors and telling them what was happening. He used the satellite phone to put in a call to the safety and operations manager at Tote, a man named John Lawrence. And while he must have been on the verge of panic, he actually manages to strike a fairly relaxed, professional tone. You just get one half of the conversation, of course. But what you see is he goes, yeah, I'm good. I'm real good. We've secured the source of the water coming into the vessel. However, Threehold's got a considerable amount of water in it. We have a very healthy port list. The engineers can't get the lube pressure on the plant. Anyway, I just wanted to give you a heads up before I push that button. And by pushing the button, what he means is sending out a distress call by satellite. That's the button that alerts the Coast Guard that there's a ship in major trouble. Back at his home, John Lawrence asked Davidson how big the waves were, and Davidson gave an underestimate. He said they were a solid 10 to 12 feet, when in fact they were more like 30 to 40 feet with breaking crests. Then Lawrence asks about the list, and Davidson admits that it's steep. About 15 degrees, he says. And that is steep, really steep. So think about the steepest suburban street you've ever walked up. You know, the kind of street that you couldn't ride a bike up or you couldn't wheel a wheelchair up. Maybe you've been to San Francisco, you know, those really steep streets with the Victorian houses on either side. Those streets, they're about 15 degrees. And that's the angle that the boat is currently at. And at this point, Lawrence decides, oh my God, that's steep. You guys are in deep shit. I'm going to get out of the way. And he tells Davidson, all right, thank you. You do your thing, Captain. And the two men say goodbye and they hang up. And a minute later, the El Faro dispatched a distress signal via satellite. Half a minute after that, it transmitted an alert to the Coast Guard, providing the vessel's coordinates along with its drift speed and direction. For Davidson and the crew, all they could do now was sit tight and try to ride out the storm. A hurricane it's an extremely isolated place to be. No one could reach them in the depths of that storm. They might as well have been on Mars, and they knew it. But in this disastrous run of bad luck, they now had a new problem to deal with. And the problem was that a fire main had ruptured in the hold. So modern ships, they've got pretty comprehensive firefighting systems. But one of these pipes in the El Faro had got hit by something in the hurricane, and it was now gushing water all into the hull. And in the bridge, there's some talk about, oh my God, this is not what we need. How are we going to deal with this? And they're trying to problem solve. And you notice that there's this new tone creeping in, and it's resignation. There's just too much water, too much wind, and no engine power. So finally, at 7:27 a.m., Captain Davidson made the decision to abandon ship. And they must have been terrified. And not just because they were trying to abandon the ship in a hurricane, but because there's nowhere to go. El Faro was equipped with open-top lifeboats, similar to those used on the Titanic. Most modern ships carry these round fiberglass. They look a bit like submarines. They're like lifeboats, but they're just sort of circular barrels, you know, often bright orange. And they contain electronic beacons. And these things, if you are in a hurricane in one of these things, you're going to have a hell of a nauseating ride. You'll get bumped around and thrown up and down. But, you know, you might survive. But the El Faro, it didn't have these things. It was like a remnant in the 1970s. It only had these wooden Titanic sort of style open top lifeboats. In fact, actually, one time, a few months earlier, before all this happened, Danielle Randolph, she'd actually texted a photo of the El Faro's lifeboats to her mum. And her mum was also a mariner, and she thought the open lifeboats were a thing of the past. And she saw this photo, and she just replied, oh my God, let's hope you never get into some rough seas. Because, you know, you'd be screwed. Now, all these months later, Randolph and the rest of the team were trying to survive in these wooden boats. But it was either go down with the ship or try your luck. And here we get into the last minute of transcript. And honestly, it's kind of heartbreaking. What happens is that Davidson orders everyone to put on their life vests and get outside onto the deck. But this big guy named Frank Ham, he freezes up. I actually mentioned him before. Davidson made him a cup of coffee because he was freaking out. And I feel for Frank because, I'd be freaking out too. And the ship, it must be almost on its side by now because Frank can't climb out of the control room and the captain is trying to help him out. And Frank, he's obviously just frozen in panic. The last words heard on the bridge are from Davidson, and he's crying out to Frank, who's trying to climb out of this overturned control room. And Davidson's yelling. He's going, "Frank, it's time to come this way." And then there's just the sound of screaming. At 7:39, there's the sound of building low-frequency rumble until the end of recording. And it was the sound of the El Faro sinking into the ocean. And 10 seconds after that, the whole recording cuts out. Back on the mainland, everyone was fearing the worst. As the hurricane moved on, 7 military aircraft scoured about 30,000 square miles of ocean, and they couldn't find a ship. Just debris and a long slick of oil. Over the following days, search efforts found 2 empty inflatable life rafts and one of the ship's wooden lifeboats, smashed up on both sides and barely afloat. Then they managed to find one bright orange immersion suit that contained human remains, but the body was already so decayed that they couldn't tell who they were looking at or even what gender it was. And then they got a report of a possible survivor, so they dropped a GPS marker on the body and the helicopter took off. Only it turns out it was a false sighting and the GPS marker failed, so they never even identified the one body that they'd found. And then on December 2015, about 2 months after the El Faro sank, there were a couple walking along a beach in Florida, and they found a green hard hat washed up on the sand. And it was crusty with little bits of seaweed all over it, but the name Frank was scrawled in handwriting across the top. And somehow, this couple, they thought it might be connected to the El Faro, and then they took a photo, and the photo made its way to Frank Ham's wife, who recognized her husband's handwriting. And the couple, they sent the hard hat to Frank Ham's wife, who now keeps it next to her bed. 2 years later, in 2017, Tote settled with the bereaved families who'd lost loved ones. Court documents showed that each family received $500,000, plus compensation for lost wages and other losses. And then, finally, on September 24, 2017, the US Coast Guard released their report on the sinking, which included the transcript that I've been referring to today. And they produced the transcript by getting professional mariners to carefully listen through each hour of the recording and manually type it all out. And the guy who led that effort, he said how horrible it was listening to the whole thing. He was a professional seaman himself. He said this to a small newspaper who ran this story. He said, "It's chilling to hear fellow mariners' last words in such a tragic ending. It's something that is burned in my mind." And I kind of understand that. I've spent the last few days doing nothing but reading this transcript and reading and writing and just living inside this little tiny world. But now I think I know what it'd be like to be on a sinking ship, and especially one with no survivors. But I also know it didn't have to be this way. Something I keep coming back to is that there's a parallel universe in which it all worked out okay. If the captain hadn't been angling for a promotion, it might have been okay. Or if he'd been using a more accurate weather forecasting service, or if Tote had invested on the premium version of the service, it might have been okay. Or if the scuttle hadn't opened in the wind and dumped all that water into the hull, or if the engineers had somehow got the engines going, or if the lifeboats had been fully enclosed, there's just so many ways that it could have been okay. But the one that really hurts the most is the way that so few people spoke up. And when they did, when Danielle Randolph spoke up, she was still so polite about it. No one got angry. No one just put down their foot and said, "Stop." And I just think, humans, we are just creatures that crave acceptance. It's so hard for most of us to speak up, even when we know we should. But then, I don't know, what can we learn from that? I mean, it's kind of a cliche, trust your instincts. And like I said earlier, trusting your instincts, it's kind of hard, especially as so many of us live with the constant hum of anxiety these days. Like, it's hard to differentiate between, is this my instinct for survival or is this just anxiety? But I was thinking about that, and I truly believe, I think gut instincts have got a special vibe. I think they've got a particular feeling. And for me, it's almost like if I want to ignore the feeling because it's inconvenient, then that's how I know that it's my intuition talking. It almost feels like the less that I want to do a thing, the more I know I should. And I just think that if someone had stood up to Davidson, yeah, they might have been very inconveniently fired, but they'd probably still be alive. And so when I think about it, when I boil it all down, that's what this story means for me. This story, to me, feels like a cautionary tale about the importance of trusting your own instincts, even when you really, really, really can't be bothered. And honestly, I'd rather be the person who is occasionally annoying and also persistently alive. A huge thanks to everyone who wrote one of the numerous articles, books, and reports from which I gathered today's story. I'll leave a reading list on the show notes in case you want to go deep. I'll include the transcript too. It is, like I've said, a pretty grueling read. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. And follow the show, please. Don't just search for it every week like I do. Just because I'm an idiot. I just go to the search bar and I'm like, what's that show that I listen to literally every day, and I look it up. And don't do that. Don't do what I do. Just follow the show. Follow this show. Lean in, commit. We'll be eternally grateful. Today's episode was produced by Rachel Tuffrey. It was mixed by Jimmy Saunders, who also did our theme music. Evie Atkins is our intern. Our cover art is by Naomi Lee Beveridge. And this whole thing has been a Super Ill production.
Need new glasses or want a fresh new style? Warby Parker has you covered. Glasses start at just $95, including anti-reflective, scratch-resistant prescription lenses that block 100% of UV rays. Every frame's designed in-house with a huge selection of styles for every face shape. And with Warby Parker's free home try-on program, you can order 5 pairs to try at home for free. Shipping is free both ways, too. Go to warbyparker.com/covered to try 5 pairs of frames at home for free. warbyparker.com/covered.
When it comes to your finances, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, and you've invested all that you can. Now it's time to take those investments to the next level by using the brand behind every great investor, Yahoo Finance. As America's #1 finance destination, Yahoo Finance has everything you need, whether you're a seasoned trader or just dipping your toes into the market. Join the millions of investors who trust Yahoo Finance to guide them on their financial journey. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com.